Now, even though the driver's title is all done and dusted, do not be sad, my friend. There are still plenty of things to be excited about, including something old school that will get people foaming at the mouth with excitement, including the question about whether or not the Ferrari drivers will eat each other's faces. There is still going to be a monumental fight on display in Qatar, which I believe Max Verstappen will allow to play out in front of him, and he could be right there when both parties start to lose time, or maybe some bodywork over it. And in the case of McLaren, anyone under the age of 25 has never actually experienced what it's like for McLaren to win any kind of silverware in terms of titles. But one of them will get this trophy, the Constructors, and I don't think Red Bull can do enough to try and snatch it away from either of them because, let's be real, right now, the team has got one arm tied behind their back because nobody knows how capable Sergio Perez will be in the final two races, his fate with Red Bull being decided after Abu Dhabi with a shareholders meeting. Yeah, that need I say more? Because right now, that's not their priority. They've got their own worries about the RB21 with their technical director Pierre Vacher uncertain as to whether or not they can address all of the concerns that they have with Nat and the RB20 and how that developed. I think they are going to be just happy with third place in the Constructors because they'll get some extra wind tunnel time, and they need all the wind tunnel time they can get to try and find a solution for 2025, and especially more time to develop the 2026 car, because come New Year's Day, all the teams can resume progress and development on that car, and I think it's going to be very interesting about which team is going to prioritize next year if they want to try and get some glory and titles, and that might compromise them into 2026, like we saw with Mercedes in 2021 when they fought off Red Bull. So yeah, I'm pretty sure Christian Horner is a bit gutted that they're not going to win the Constructors title this year, but I think he's thinking long term for 2026, because if they don't do something right now, then the next regulation cycle could be very, very bad for them like it was in 2014. That was a wake-up call. So I don't think they want that to happen again. Now, before we continue, let me take a moment of your time to introduce you to something truly unique. A bracelet created from genuine Formula One tyres, provided and created by the fine people over at Mongrip, based in Monte Carlo. Each bracelet comes beautifully packaged in this sleek presentation box, nestled on a plush little pillow, and they're made in Italy using top quality materials straight from the world of Formula One. Inside the box, you'll find a certificate of authenticity and a brief story about the specific tyre that you will be wearing on your wrist. And yes, it does smell like the real deal. I'll demonstrate. Oh, that is unmistakably the smell of Formula One. Plus, you can choose from several variations, including limited edition pieces backed by the legendary estates of Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher, each with its own distinctive flair. Now, of course, this isn't exactly a budget buy, but it's such an incredible keepsake for any Formula One enthusiast, especially if you're thinking about a Christmas gift for them. Honestly, this is the perfect way to treat them or yourself this holiday season and have a piece of this motorsports history on your wrist. Hashtag wristery. For me, it's like wearing my passion on my wrist, and it's really hard to convey over camera, so let me just sniff it for you again. Oh, that feels right. So be sure to check the link in the description to get your hands on one of these authentic F1 treasures. Huge thanks to Mongrip for sponsoring this video. So for now, the two classic teams will be giving old school fans a treat, as this is echoing clashes that we've seen since the 1970s. And with only 20-ish points between them, McLaren does have the chance to wrap things up here before Abu Dhabi and make things a heck of a lot easier for themselves. Or, potentially, Ferrari could close the gap even more, or maybe overtake them, because according to the weather forecast, it's not going to be as hot in Qatar around the Losail circuit as it was last year, because it certainly helps that the race is taking place around December instead of late October, when the temperatures were absolutely scorchio. Here, it's expected to be maybe 24 degrees air temperature, which is, I think, quite bearable, and actually is within the preferences of Ferrari according to some of the other races, but McLaren may still pull a fast one, so it's a little less certain that McLaren will just romp away with it. But the one thing that might at this present time get McLaren across the line is, since that they've got the team first mantra down, that both drivers are going to be thinking about what's best for McLaren, and they are pretty much singing from the same hymn sheet for the time being. So there's no reason to do anything else. But with Ferrari, right now, after Vegas, oh, it's a relatively different animal. And after many years where both Sainz and Leclerc, there wasn't really any sign of a dispute or rivalry, because Ferrari were down in the doldrums after 2020, so they were sort of working together with a sense of unity to bring Ferrari back to some sort of semblance of glory where they can be in with a shout of winning a Grand Prix or two. Now that there is actually going to be a trophy on display, then the order and stakes are going to be a lot higher and a lot more dangerous, and we saw that in display in Vegas. It reached a crescendo, and according to Italian reports, Vassar supposedly confronted both of his drivers and demanded a loyal collaboration between the pair of them, who only have to work together for 2 more weekends, and that is that. Carlos will be off to Williams into James Vowles' bosom for the Abu Dhabi test, and out of Charles' direct line of sight for good. At pretty much the right time too, which means that Charles can then refocus, regroup, and then get ready for 2025 when Lewis Hamilton will be his teammate, and then we can see how he handles himself now against another multiple world champion. Because right now, it looks like Leclerc is reaching the end of his tether with Ferrari, and something might snap even further than we saw in Vegas, which we weren't supposed to hear. Charles didn't realise he left his radio open, and then the whole world heard his little tirade. And even though Vassar has done his best to calm things down, I think it is going to be spilling over a little bit more, and that we will see Charles playing from his own script, and probably stepping on the toes of the people from the Scuderia pit wall. So maybe that might be enough for McLaren to just get on with it and win the trophy whilst Ferrari bicker amongst themselves, and that would be really tragic for the people in red. I mean, I feel sorry for any Ferrari fan right now. Whoa, hang on, Law. There's more stuff to talk about the Qatar Grand Prix than just that drama. Well, yes, of course there is, aside from the questionable human rights record there. Of course there is. The track devastated the tyres, yes. Because do you remember a year ago, aside from Lance Stroll crashing out in Q1 and then shoving his personal trainer, and many people talked about it for days because it's still something that really shouldn't have happened, the tyres' reaction to the really questionable serrated curbs, that they imposed a lap limit of 18 laps. If you went over that, then there was no guarantee that that tyre would survive. Yeah, that was pretty wild, wasn't it? Do I reckon it'll happen again? Well, as I touched upon earlier, no, I don't think so, because the air temperature is nowhere near as hostile as it was, nor do I think the drivers will suffer quite as much, and also because the track organisers have actually looked at this alongside the FIA and Formula 1 to try and address some of the concerns, by making sure that track limits aren't as abused as much. There are some gravel traps at certain corners, and those curbs that were really pointed, they're actually now been smoothed over to try and make it a little bit more forgiving for the tyres. So I think we will see a more sedate Grand Prix, so we're not going to be seeing tyres shredding or exploding. So with these temperatures lower than last year, could this really affect McLaren's form? Possibly. Now, excuse me, apologies here, but Cadillac has said that they're confirming interest in Verstappen, saying he would be a good driver. And oh, can you imagine that, eh? Starting with a brand new team, Cadillac General Motors. Oh, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I think we'll save that for another time, so subscribe for when I make that video when that drops. So anyway, speaking of Verstappen, what kind of race could we expect from Red Bull? Well, that's dependent on how willing Max is to go all out now that he's wrapped up his 4th title, which was a hard-fought battle, which at points the Dutchman did start to question whether he had done enough to retain it during a tricky mid-season period for the team and car. And according to many interviews that he conducted, there were very brief moments throughout this entire season when he was at his lowest that he did consider his future about whether or not he would stay with Red Bull or quit Formula 1 altogether. But ultimately, he decided to rise above it, and now he's pretty much cemented his position with Red Bull. He's not going anywhere for the foreseeable, even with these reports from Cadillac that they want to take him on. Because we heard that from Aston Martin, I'm pretty much just deaf to those now. I mean, it's wild, of course, but, you know, Max, right now, he can win titles, there you go. Just come back to me in 2026 with these, okay? And that being said, I would imagine that he'd probably be setting his sights now on 2025, since that will not be so easy, and Red Bull might not be as certain to have such a flying start like they did this year, which was enough of a buffer to ensure that Max could hold on and just do some damage limitation against Lando and McLaren. As well as I think Red Bull are breathing a huge sigh of relief that Mercedes had a mardy of a start to 2024, and Red Bull had such a great year, and therefore they didn't have to worry about Toto Wolff's team about maybe giving them the slip and pushing Red Bull down to 4th in the Constructors. And could you imagine if Checo had a really bad start to the season like he has had for the rest of the season after the likes of the Australian Grand Prix? And speaking of Mercedes, do I believe that they could maintain their surprise form from Las Vegas? Well, short answer, no. Not even they are buying into their own hype. This is not a case of Mercedes being right back at the front, because they suspect that the different weather conditions to Vegas will limit the W15's potential. Not even the supposed celebratory race suit for Lewis to mark the end of his time with Mercedes could maybe increase their prospects. And it really is emblematic of the really glorious days of Lewis Hamilton's time with Mercedes. So to have that for the last couple of races, that would be really sweet. It's very subtle, but I think it's quite a tasteful tribute. It's not too showy. There's also a lot of kerfuffle on social media, not just because of these pictures, but about whether or not Mercedes were using some kind of descendant of DAS, which was a tool that they used to great effect in 2020 to adjust the front tyre angle and modulate temperature in them, which was banned for 2021 onwards. So I've seen many examples of Twitter sleuths just stopping and rewinding and forwarding the video and then just trying to do a loop to make it look like that George's wheel is going back and forth. And many people have suspected that maybe this is a case of them trying to do something under the noses of the FIA and Formula 1, and now many people are starting to think, like with McLaren and their mini DRS feature, that Mercedes, that's why they were so good in Vegas, that's why they were being coy about they had no idea why they were so fast. Cheaters! But no, I really don't see that being the case, because many people out there are also just looking at it and going like, nah mate, they've just got a looser steering column than the other drivers, and well, the FIA haven't actually talked about it, Red Bull have not complained about it, because you know Red Bull would have been complaining about it once they had the access to the onboard cameras. They'd have been watching that and they'd have been crying foul, but they haven't. And if Red Bull aren't complaining, then neither should we. But yeah, a double podium here in Qatar, really, I'm ruling that out. Although the cooler climate might see them contest the top 5, but maybe narrowly miss out. So they could get maybe a 6th or 7th or something like that, because I think the Ferrari and McLarens, they just look too consistent at the moment to predict otherwise. As for the rest of the grid, it is really hard to say. And even though Alfa Romeo, or Sauber now, did net themselves a double points finish to try and get them ahead of Haas, I just feel like they really can't emulate that again. However, I feel like since they do have some good form here, that maybe, like in Vegas, they can at least get one of their cars out of Q1 and into Q2, and hopefully it's Bottas. So that means he can have some sense of hope to try and not be 23rd in a 20-driver series. I think that would be just some crumb of comfort before, as the reports are saying, he goes back to Mercedes as being one of their reserves. Haas, I think, could be decent around here, because last year, Nico qualified in 6th and finished in 6th place. So really, that was a huge testimony of their own last year, when the car was an absolute savage on its tyres, and Gunther Steiner's team, they had absolutely no clue that Austin upgrade had failed, and Nico went back to the old spec, and they were just having to make do. Whereas now, Haas in 2024, they look a whole lot more assured and have a better understanding of their car. So they might also be aware about how potentially it could be really good for them in their quest to retain 6th place in the Constructors, because right now they've gotten that back from Alpine. They will want to keep it that way, because it's only about 1 point with 2 races and a sprint to go. And if all things go well in Abu Dhabi as well, it might be enough for them to actually hold on and get all of that prize money, so much more than last year, and it will do them the world of good. But Racing Bulls and Alpine could be in with a shout of some points as well, because those other 2 teams might be able to lock out the 9th and 10th spots, but it all depends on whether or not Haas has a good time of it in qualifying, or maybe the lower temperatures might favour their rivals or something like that. But I certainly would like to pick Haas as my favourite for a good chunk of points here, based on last year's car, and the conditions being a little bit more favourable for them. But does that mean no points for Aston Martin, even though they scored last year? I really seriously cannot see them doing so after this year's slump, because let's go back to Singapore. That was the last time an Aston Martin scored, and it was 8th place. It's been a really bad time of it, and Lance has not scored since before that, and more often than not, has not been able to get out of Q1. This slump is absolutely sensational for all the wrong reasons. Fernando is probably on the edge of maybe getting a point or something like that. He was really close in Vegas, even though the odds were stacked against him. And right now, I don't think Aston Martin care, because they've got 5th place sewn up pretty much, unless some of the other 3 teams has a huge bumper crop of points coming their way, which I do doubt now. I don't really see any more upsets happening because, you know, the weather in Abu Dhabi and Qatar is going to be relatively stable, and unless there's some crashes, there might be something else to play. But right now, they're probably looking to 2025 and just trying to come up with some sort of a solution to the problem as to why this direction has gone completely awry, which is why I think that maybe next year could be a little bit more stable, because one of the important things that Adrian Newey was around for during his last few years with Red Bull was to be the overseer of what Pierre Vacher's team were doing. As him being the chief technical partner, it means he can just make sure that if Aston Martin start off with something good for next year, that they will keep it that way and make sure it doesn't go completely squiffy and is completely incapable of scoring points. So I don't see a huge slump from Aston Martin next year at the cost of these final 2 races, but hey, they've got 5th place, what does it matter to them anymore, except for maybe Fernando keeping his place in the top 10, because Lance ain't getting that back, that's for sure. But that is still way ahead of them still, and Qatar might be painful for them and Williams. They too will want the season to end with either driver just getting the car home in one piece, because 9th is pretty much guaranteed. I don't see them getting 8th place, there's nothing to fight for anymore. Surely they don't have the resources to bring 2025 experiment parts to test in FP1, because they barely have current parts. Because as it's turned out, they actually had to go to Aston Martin and go, "Please sir, may we have some parts?" The fact they had to go cap in hand to a nearby team and ask for parts, that just goes to show how much Williams is struggling at the moment, what with its drivers crashing the car all the time. Not just Franco, it was Logan and Alex. It's not just the two rookies. But in any case, I think Williams just want to get the season over with. Just let me think, get Carlos in and get some sense of hope and good morale. And I'm hoping to show you right now my top 5 predictions. And why should I be hoping? Because, I'm in charge of editing this video. So there you go. Here you are. So in terms of who I think is going to win the Qatar Grand Prix in 2024, I am going to put my neck out there and maybe suggest that by maybe just a few seconds, it will be Lando Norris who secures his first win here. Because I think he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder at the moment. Sure, the driver's title, that's out of his hands now because it's all wrapped up. And he has now admitted that he wasn't ready to take on Max Verstappen over the course of a whole season. But he has also got a mission for 2025 to play out for these last 2 races and the sprint. He is going to be probably trying to make his case to his McLaren bosses that he is the guy for them to back for 2025 as well, because Oscar Piastri will be nowhere near as accommodating that he has been this year. He's been very smart by playing the team game for now. But since Lando had his chance and didn't convert it, then things might get a little bit more tempestuous. So I feel like Lando, now that he doesn't have to worry about a championship, can now go all guns blazing and make good on this circuit, which McLaren are expected to be the favourites on. And he'll also want to draw a line on what happened last year, which allowed Oscar to gain some more positive headlines and make people actually go, hey, that young Australian's pretty good. He wants to be ahead of Oscar. So I think that motivation will be enough for him to be able to make a win here and maybe get his 4th victory, because I think Abu Dhabi might be a little bit less optimistic in terms of the victory. But hey, 4 wins in one season for Lando, not bad at all. And let's be real, I think he's going to be very grateful for all the stuff that he's had with Verstappen. It'll make great practice for 2025, which will probably be one of the most contested titles of this decade for sure. 2021 might have a run for its money. And also, Lando can start to get himself reacquainted with the MCL38, because I would like to hope that McLaren has some parts to give him for this race, because they know that this is a race they can possibly win relatively easily. Because right now, Lando's a little bit concerned about where the direction of this car has gone, because even McLaren has now been subjected to the woes and rigours of upgrades going wrong. This should be a doable win for Lando. I'm not expecting this to be a Zandvoort or Singapore where he can just romp off into the distance and win by 20 seconds. No, it's going to be a very closely fought one between him and the second place man, Charles Leclerc. Because Ferrari right now must understand that if they can't get some good points from McLaren at Qatar, or at least limit the amount of points that McLaren can gain from them, then it's basically all over, unless reliability gets the better of the Papaya Woking team, and the Scuderia can make advantage of that. But considering how reliability has been really good for the Mercedes unit, and Piastri still has his 100% lap streak, I really don't see that happening. But you never know what could happen in these last 2 races, because even Ferrari could have a reliability issue of their own, because, history. And also, most importantly, Charles Leclerc will have a bone to pick with Carlos Sainz and his team. He will be motivated to try and at least get some kind of place on the podium, because otherwise his own fight for second place in the driver's standings will be brought into question. And even though many people are thinking, oh, why would Charles care about second place? Because that's the first of the losers. Nobody remembers who came runner-up in a championship. No. But the drivers do. They still get a nice trophy for it at the FIA Gala. And also, it's a case of status and reputation that he was the first of the runner-ups, and then being able to stake his case and his claim for next year when Lewis arrives. And I really want to see what he can do now that Leclerc seems to be fired up. He seems to be motivated. He might be out for himself. If he can figure out a strategy which works for him, then it might actually be advantageous for him. And it might be able to put Carlos in his place for these last 2 races, and things might settle down. Or alternatively, if they qualify relatively close, it could be even worse, and then Ferrari lose the Constructors that way, and that would be absolutely cataclysmic. Ferrari, the Tifosi, I don't know what the Tifosi would do in this situation if both of their drivers fought each other, because I don't think that's happened in recent memory. Usually the 1-2 dynamic has been quite strong. Let me know in the comments if you can recall the last time that two of the Ferrari drivers fought each other or absolutely detested each other, apart from Pironi and Villeneuve back in the 80s, because they really didn't like each other after team orders, had that kerfuffle. So yeah, I think that Ferrari will push itself to its limit, and with these slightly lower temperatures, it might bring them back into play and make sure that McLaren just don't run away with it. So therefore, I think Leclerc will be the meat in a McLaren sandwich, because I'm placing Oscar Piastri in a, admittedly, rather optimistic third place. Yes, I have been actually quite down on my favourite driver currently, Oscar, but with good reason, and even he has realised that he's had a mardy of a few weekends. Since Austin, it's been relatively low-key, or if there's been a chance for him to actually get some good results, it's been all undone by his own mistakes in qualifying due to track limits, which then puts him down in Q1 or something like in the Austin Sprint, and during Mexico Q1. And even though I do think he can actually bounce back from all of these mediocre results or so, being behind the likes of Lando, because this is a track that he does really vibe with, I do feel like that third place is probably the best that he can muster, because no one's quite sure about the ability of the MCL38 to convert what we saw from the MCL60, and whether or not Ferrari might have enough in the tank to be able to best at least one of them. It's just down to his recent results that I just cannot put him as the winner of the Qatar Grand Prix. The sprint, though, may be a different story, because you don't have to worry about your tyres then, and as we saw, Oscar did do enough to stay ahead of everybody else, even though Max admittedly was slightly coasting because he knew he could win the championship behind Piastri, but that's besides the point. The team are aware that Oscar can do good, and he needs to do good to make sure that McLaren don't have to go all the way to Abu Dhabi next week to try and get their Constructors trophy. If they can do it here, then fantastic. But admittedly, I do have to limit my expectations with Oscar. But he also has a point to prove as well, because right now he's 4th place in the Drivers' Championship, and Carlos has been catching up race after race after race, his arch nemesis for some reason. It's such a random rivalry. He'll probably want to finish in the top 4 to cap off what is otherwise a really respectable season, where he's now won his first Grand Prix, and then won convincingly his second. So we can easily see more from this guy, but I think really he's looking to 2025 now, but also just wanting to cap things off with McLaren to say that he did his part. Then in 4th place, I've got Max Verstappen. Only 4th, Law? Really? You don't think that he's going to be challenging for the win? Well, it all depends on what happens up front if McLaren and Ferrari get themselves in a tangle. If they do, then Max will be right there to pick up the pieces and then get himself a cheeky podium finish, or maybe the win right underneath their noses, because as we've seen this season, Max has been on the back foot, but the people around him are contesting as to who is going to be the one to go after Max, which means that Max just runs away with it, like in Canada, for example. I don't think that Max is going to be firing on all cylinders, simply because he's probably exhausted, and he's done. And Red Bull, there's nothing to fight for at the moment, because they're not going to win the Constructors title unless a miracle happens. They're going to need all the time they can get in the wind tunnel, even though I do suspect he might try. But if it doesn't work out and Red Bull aren't the fastest car, then it's no skin off his nose. He's fine with it, because right now he's going to be looking to next year as well. All these drivers are going to be looking to some degree to next year, because one of 6 or 7 drivers could possibly win the title if they have the right combination and they've got the right mindset. So therefore, I don't think Max will be all that fussed in trying to outperform the car. And then in 5th place, despite placing much higher in Vegas and being a real thorn in Ferrari's side, I pick Carlos Sainz, because I'm pretty sure that Carlos will get an even more stern talking to from Fred Vasseur than probably the Frenchman gave to Charles Leclerc, stating that he still has a part to play. And if Carlos really wants to emulate his idea of returning to Maranello in a few years' time, maybe as the team leader if the 2 drivers presently leave for different teams or retire, then right now he's not doing a good job of that, because he is looking out for himself. Even though his strategy calls have proven to be actually quite shrewd, and Ferrari did drop the ball a couple of occasions during his tenure with them. But right now, I'm pretty sure that he's going to be walking on eggshells at the moment, and he might not want to rock the boat, especially when the Constructors is at play here. So if he does get into some chicanery with Charles, that could compromise it, and that might be the last chance for him to play his part in a team winning a major trophy for a quite long time, if ever. So he has to be very, very careful here. So I don't think he'll take any risks. And also, last year, he didn't really do all that well in the Qatar qualifying. He wasn't really setting the world on fire at this track. So I cannot give him any higher than 5th at the moment. We might see some good strategy calls. If there's a safety car or virtual safety car, things could be changed up a bit. But right now, I think Leclerc has the better of him at this track. So I don't think we're going to be seeing any argy-bargy unless they qualify close to each other. If it turns out that he has already burnt that bridge and that they're not going to be having him back now or ever, then hey, expect fireworks. Much like how you could expect some interesting displays from the new team coming to F1 in 2026. The Cadillac team who are finishing what the Andretti mission started might be better than most pundits think, and it might be the best place for Checo to finish his F1 career at for many mutually beneficial reasons. To find out why I think they might do well with Checo next to Herta, go and watch this video next straight after this one.